Hey everyone, this is Maddie, one of the naturalists here at Gulf Branch Nature Center, bringing you this week's 5-minute find. If you've visited the park recently to walk on the trails or check on the owl, you've probably noticed a lot of bees hanging out near our kiosk. I wanted to give you some more information about these bees so that when you do visit, you don't have to feel afraid. I'm going to turn the camera around so we can get a good look at them. Here's our kiosk at the start of the trail. Right here's the pond over here, and we'll come back to the kiosk. On the underside of the kiosk, you can see a number of bees flying around. These bees are called giant resin bees, and they're cousins to our native leafcutter bees. But giant resin bees actually come from parts of China and Japan, and they were first found in the United States in the 1990s. They can now be found in every state east of the Mississippi River, and scientists who study bees expect that giant resin bees will continue to expand their range westward until they can be found all throughout the United States and parts of Canada as well. The bees that we're seeing here today are actually female giant resin bees, and they're looking for places to lay their eggs. So if we get a little closer, we can actually see some holes here on the underside of the kiosk that were created by a different kind of bee called the carpenter bee. The giant resin bees, the female giant resin bees, will crawl into these holes and lay their eggs inside. Inside these holes, they'll create little partitions in between each egg that they make using mud and particles of wood that they've gathered, so that each egg ends up having its own little room or cell. And inside each cell, they'll place pollen that they've collected. So giant resin bees really love to collect pollen from flowers in the pea family, and that includes plants like our native redbud tree or the invasive plant kudzu. And they'll place that pollen inside those cells so that each little egg has a stash of food. When that egg hatches, it will grow and eat that pollen as a larva, and eventually next spring and summer emerge from this hole as an adult giant resin bee. These resin bees that we're seeing here today, after they lay eggs, will eventually die before the winter months, but again, their young will survive inside these holes and emerge next spring and summer. I'm going to come around to the other side of the kiosk so we can get a better look here. Most of the time, giant resin bees are solitary nesters, which means each female will find her own spot to nest and provide for her own babies. So what we're seeing here are a lot of females utilizing a similar space. So they're not necessarily working together the way some of our social nesters will, like our honeybees, right? They're each laying their own eggs and providing for their own eggs, but they're just sort of using a common space here. In the case of bees like honeybees or some of our social wasps, just one of those bees in the hive or nest will do the egg laying while the rest of the bees work to support those eggs. But in this case, each giant female resin bee will again be laying her own eggs and providing for her own eggs. They just happen to be all sort of using the same collective space here because it must be a pretty good space. If you visit the Nature Center, please don't feel afraid of these bees. The male giant resin bees don't have stingers, so they can't hurt you. And the female giant resin bees really have to feel threatened to sting. You would have to probably hold one in your hands, and she would have to feel like she couldn't get out. But you can see I'm sitting right here next to them, and they're not bothering me at all. They're totally busy with what they're doing. And aren't bothered by my presence. So if you're going to take a walk and you happen to pass by the kiosk, certainly stop by and check these bees out. I will let you know that, again, they are not native bees, and they actually sometimes provide a little bit of unnecessary competition for our native carpenter bees because they are using these holes that were created by carpenter bees. So there is some research that shows that they might negatively impact carpenter bee populations, but we're just not sure yet because they're still relatively new species to our area. If you have any questions about giant resin bees, certainly feel free to explore online or knock on the door while you're here at the park, and a naturalist can come out and answer any of your questions if they're here. Otherwise, enjoy your time while you're here at the Nature Center, and we will see you next week for our next 5-minute find.